For much of its history, Ireland has been considered as something of a land on the fringes and the margins of the world. Nestled on the edge of the continent, it represented the end of Europe and the beginning of the unknown, which lay to the west among the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. Until the arrival of the Normans in the 12th century, Ireland had remained the land where the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead, and between that of the transmigratory aspects of reality and spirit, remained forever flexible and arbitrary. Until very recent times, Irish folklore was filled with tales of fairies and other non-human entities which were always just outside the perception of everyday mortals. Be they a shadow moving across a wall, or a strange rustling of leaves within a silent hedgerow, the world of the fairy folk, the ghosts of the departed souls, and other more malevolent creatures is never far away. Ireland exists to remind us all that high strangeness remains a fact of life. The very Irish landscape itself, with its ruins and ancient temples built by long-lost and mysterious people, forever remains a suitable backdrop for the legends and folk tales which take place among their haunted stones. Of all the species of ghostly phenomena, that commonly known as haunted houses appeals most to the ordinary person. There is something very eerie in being shut up within the four walls of a house with a ghost. The poor human being is placed at such a disadvantage. If we know that a gateway, a road, or field has the reputation of being haunted, we can in nearly every case make a detour, and so avoid the unpleasant locality. But the presence of a ghost in a house creates a very different state of affairs. It appears and disappears at its own sweet will, with a total disregard for our feelings. It seems to be as much a part and parcel of the domicile as the staircase or the hall door, and, consequently, nothing short of leaving the house, or of pulling it down, will free us absolutely from the unwelcome presence. There is also something so natural and at the same time so unnatural in seeing a door open when we know that no human hand rests on the knob, or in hearing the sound of footsteps, light or heavy, and feeling that it cannot be attributed to the feet of mortal man or woman. Or perhaps a form appears in a room, standing, sitting, or walking, in fact, situated in its three dimensions apparently as an ordinary being of flesh and blood, until it proves its unearthly nature by vanishing before our astonished eyes. Or perhaps we are asleep in bed. The room is shrouded in darkness, and our recumbent attitude, together with the weight of the bedclothes, hampers our movements and probably makes us more cowardly. A man will meet pain or danger boldly if he is standing upright, occupying the erect position which is his as Lord of creation. But his courage does not well so high if he be supine. We are awakened suddenly by the feel of some superhuman presence in the room. We are transfixed with terror. We cannot find either the bell rope or the matches, while we dare not leap out of the bed and make a rush for the door, lest we should encounter we know not what. In an agony of fear, we feel it moving towards us. It approaches us closer, but the skeptical will say, "This is all very well, but there are no haunted houses." All these alleged strange happenings are due to a vivid imagination, or else to rats, to mice. The question of deliberate and conscious fraud may be rejected in almost every instance. This simple solution has been put forward so often that it should infallibly have solved the problem a long time ago. But will such a reader explain how? It is that the noise made by rats and mice can resemble heavy footsteps, or else take the form of a human being seen by several persons, or how our imagination can cause doors to open or shut, or else create a conglomeration of noises which physically would be beyond the power of ordinary individuals to produce. Whatever may be the ultimate explanation, we feel that there is a great deal in the words quoted by Professor Barrett. In spite of all reasonable skepticism, it is difficult to avoid accepting, at least provisionally, the conclusions that are, in a certain sense, haunted houses. That there are houses in which similar quasi-human apparitions have occurred at different times to different inhabitants, under circumstances which exclude suggestion or expectation. In the northwest of Ireland lies the city of Sligo, once a thriving port town, and is now the gateway to the region for visiting tourists. The landscape surrounding the town of Sligo is especially rich in folklore and ancient history. Situated in a housing estate on the outskirts of Sligo is Ireland's oldest roundabout, built nearly 6,000 years ago. However, this traffic roundabout today is actually built around the remains of a Neolithic passage chamber dating from around 3700 BC. Today, the site now consists of 44 boulders arranged in a circle with a diameter of 23 meters. While the actual passage entrance itself is difficult to detect, the 44 stones surrounding the 23-meter circumference site remain intact, although the location originally had 4 tall standing stones. When the chamber was excavated in 1888, apart from some wolves' teeth, not much else was discovered. The site appears to also have an east to west solar alignment, and also appears to be aligned to the Court Cairn across Lough Gill at Deer Park Mountain, as well as with Queen Maeve's Mound atop the sacred Knocknarea mountain, the mountain of the moon, suggesting that the same culture was responsible for the vast megalithic heritage in and around this part of Sligo. However, what really makes this roundabout significant, now called Abbey Quarter North Passage Mound, is the folklore among the residents of the surrounding houses. The houses themselves were built in the 1940s, and so as to not incite the fairies, rather than any historical preservation imperative, the local council placed the circular passage mound in the centre of a traffic roundabout. Almost as soon as the new residents moved into the houses, reports began of strange experiences involving the fairy mound. People would claim that when crossing the circle of standing stones, they would find themselves exiting the circle at a different location than the one which they had intended to use, and often with unusual time differences and anomalies being reported. People and animals would cross the circle and claim to simply vanish and appear in another part of town. Very soon, the locals were in no doubt that they were living in close proximity to the fairies. The local Catholic Church soon became concerned about all this talk of fairies, and in particular the locals talking and acting as if they were still living in pagan times. So, to address this, in the holy year of 1954, a stone crucifixion scene was erected at the site. The local residents were forced to pay for it by the Catholic Church. Amazingly, the church had wanted the original monument removed, but fear among locals meant that they could not get anyone to do the work of removing it. The parish priest who oversaw the project, a Father Collins, even had great difficulty convincing local workmen to remove a hawthorn tree or fairy tree sited at the centre of the circle. Despite some residents complaining of dire retribution by the fairy folk for doing this, the tree was cut down and the monument went ahead. Almost immediately, 3 young men from the neighbourhood died suddenly and under tragic circumstances. Locals were in no doubt that the fairies were responsible. To this day, the residents in and around the ancient temple of Abbey Quarter North still take time to respectfully acknowledge their non-human neighbours, as they are well aware of the wrath of angry fairies. There is something about Ireland, its very landscape, its culture, the vistas, the mist, the silent valleys, and the cobblestone streets, even in the modern country of today, still lends itself towards the paranormal and the supernatural. As if the Irish condition itself was something of a mediator between different worlds, opening the veils between this and other states of being. A land filled with ancient ruins is a land filled with history, and a land filled with history is a land filled with experiences of human beings, both good and bad. From famine to folklore, from culture to war, each becomes a layer of strata which builds upon the landscape and the stones which remain in the buildings and the streets upon which these tales and histories took place. Over time, they become gestative forces, locations where surprising effects will manifest from the human experiences, and they will often echo to the greater human experience. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, was inspired by his mother's tales of walking dead during the 1832 cholera epidemic which struck her hometown of Sligo. People who were not dead were buried quickly or left to die, and seemingly rose from the dead. In order to ensure that they would not rise up from their graves, a stake would be driven through their hearts, pinning them to the ground. This later became the inspiration for the vampire killing methods outlined in his novel Dracula. Among this row of houses in a provincial Irish town is one house that stands out among the others, and the owners of which have asked to remain anonymous. But as incredible as the story is, it is far from unusual. For inside this now abandoned late Victorian terrace house is something known as the Bad Room. A room in the house where strange activities and sensations are known to occur. From poltergeist activities to a sense of dread and foreboding coming over anyone who spends time in such a room. In some extreme cases, as with this particular house, the lower floor room or parlour has been completely walled off from the rest of the house and left as it was when the doorway was bricked up. The theory behind such bad rooms is that a disgruntled or angry spirit has taken up residence in the room and remained there. Another theory is that the ghost of a former resident who does not actually realize they are dead still remains and is protesting the presence of these strangers in what the spirit still thinks is their own home. The protests can range from manifestation of shadow beings all the way to strange and sickening smells which occur for no other reason, and also full-blown poltergeist activity. For most people, however, the sensation of being in a bad room is one of great unease and with an almost instant desire to leave, as if the room itself contains a piece of hell. The owners of this particular house, now long departed, have not returned and have not put the house on the market, their attitude being one of best left alone. In some cases of the bad room phenomena, some people scoffed at the very idea and have dared to spend the night in such rooms, often for them to exit at 3 a.m. screaming and never to return.